Ladies and gentlemen, young aspiring professionals, welcome to the lucky 7th episode of the 12th Man Podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of sports careers and development. In today's episode, I'm honored to be joined by an incredibly wise lady, a true next-gen industry leader, academy auditor at the Premier League, and a very big Arsenal fan, Çiğdem Turkan. Çiğdem, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
I'm going to actually start by congratulating you as an Arsenal fan. You guys have scored some very big victory against Chelsea this week, 5-0. North London derby coming up on Sunday. How are we feeling?
I'm a very realistic optimist. I think the team's doing really well. I hope that they can continue that on Sunday, but football's football, right? You really don't know what happens on the day. We go into it positive. And we're hoping that we can have another sort of landslide victory, but against our biggest rivals. I think that's going to be one to enjoy. However, I would like to say all these victories don't amount to anything if we can't get it over the line. So we still need City to slip up, don't we, for it to all count. You don't get trophies for big wins.
Indeed. Well, City's playing against Brighton tonight, so we'll see how they'll do there. I mean, it's now 4 games left for you guys. I think 6 games still left for City to play. Anything can happen. That's football. We'll see how it turns out. I think by the time this podcast episode will be released, it's going to be next week, we will know definitely more about your guys' title chances. But let's see. Çiğdem, in this podcast, we usually start by asking our guests 3 introductory questions. It's to help us and to help the listeners of our podcast to get to know you a bit better and also to build some sort of a profile about you. You, of course, will be no exception. I'm going to start by the first question, and that is, what did you study in school?
So in terms of my university experience, my undergraduate was a Bachelor of Science in Sport and Exercise Sciences at Loughborough University. Quite a well-known, well-established sports university. So that was a good foundation. From there, as part of one of my roles at a club, I was in the education team working on education-based projects, and I did my PGC, which is a teacher training qualification here in the UK. And then a couple of years down the line, I really wanted to rejig my CV to get myself into positions that were a little bit more in the leadership, strategic management space. So to be able to plan for that in the future, I did my master's in international sports management.
Nice one. What was your first job?
So I feel incredibly privileged by the fact that I've always worked in football. And every time I say this, I will say, long may it continue, touch wood, whatever it is, the Turkish kicks in. Feel really privileged. But my first job was actually in football as well. I started as a steward at Arsenal. I still do that role. I think 12 odd seasons ago, I started that. And I've worked through different positions, done different qualifications, and now I'm still at Arsenal on a match day, as and when I can be as the licensing and compliance officer on a match day.
Basically like a dream, working for your favorite club. I would like to know what or who is your biggest inspiration that motivates you to do what you're doing?
So anyone that knows me knows that I have a strong relationship with my dad. And through that relationship, I was obviously brought up around football. My dad had an international transport trucking business. But on the side, we have a Turkish community football league here in North London, which has a big Turkish population, Turkish-speaking, Turkish Cypriot population. And my dad had teams. He was sponsor of teams. He was then president, chairperson of these teams. And in fact, my brother and I have started a team this season in memory of my dad in that same league. And we play under the HMT, which is my dad's initials, Samsunspor logo.
It's super, super nice to hear. We're going to move into the main section of the podcast, which is very much oriented at your career development. Now, your main position is an academy auditor. What inspired you to focus on this youth player development and player pathways?
So I've got a varied background. I've worked in various aspects of football clubs. And when I came to the point of wanting to move on from my previous role, I very randomly came across the role that I'm in now. I hadn't heard of the organization that I'm part of as a team. We're the Professional Game Academy Audit Company. And for people in the UK, essentially, that's like the Ofsted. It's probably the most similar is Ofsted, but for the football system, for youth development system here in the UK. And I don't know, I think it's just a great combination of the things that I'm interested in, the things that I have a passion for. My skill set obviously has allowed me to do that job now for the last just under 3 years. And I always say I want to do what I do because I have an impact, and it's a role that definitely allows you to have impact. Sometimes even day to day, you can really feel that you're having impact whilst you're having a conversation with someone from a club, or as part of wider stakeholder discussions where you know that your feedback and your perspective is funneling into something that in the long term starts to develop the system as a whole.
I've done some digging through your LinkedIn, and except for your academy auditing role at the Premier League, you are also having some sort of sub-roles, and one of them is education and player care auditor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you ensure that young athletes receive holistic support beyond their on-field performance? And maybe could you elaborate on some innovative approaches or initiatives that you've seen or even helped implementing to enhance player well-being?
So it's a massive topic, and it's something that I think is going to continue to develop. It's one of the big rocks, big ticket item that can really have an impact. And sometimes we talk about getting everything right on the pitch, having the best coaches, having the best sessions, having the best equipment. But I think people will perform at their best if they're feeling well, if they're feeling at their best. And you can flip that. And I always say this, you can flip that. You can say that if you perform well on the pitch, you might feel better about yourself. But we really don't want to forget that if you're at your best and you go into training and fixtures at your best, you're more likely to perform at your best. So it's a massive area. It's a growing area, developing area. We've seen clubs approach this in very different ways. In terms of our framework and what we assess by it, it's an area that develops. So when the framework was first set, I think the ground that's been covered since and the research and the implementation that's happened since will help to drive the framework forward in the next iteration of that standards framework. But yeah, it's great to see clubs interpret it in different ways because that's where we see the value in that individual difference. And it's really important, as with anything, to say that one size approach doesn't fit all. So where we see some of the better and more impactful, effective practices where anything on and off pitch is done to a real individual level to meet the individual needs of any given person. Some of the stuff that is really nice to see is where programs are developed around the strengths of those particular staff. So if mental health and wellbeing is their strength, then there's a real edge to that within the program. There's one-to-one support. There's resource to access experts and expert recommendations, and that then builds into what's happening internally at the club. Some of the stuff I've really liked is where we're obviously working with a broad age group in terms of the registration ages. You go from under 9s all the way to the 21s and first team pathway. And obviously you come across people with very diverse learning needs. We see clubs do some sort of like bite-sized education around any particular learning needs or maybe mental health and wellbeing needs that young people might have, so that we can start to upskill staff who may be working on the pitch to pick up on any of the learning needs and produce more individualized approaches. We obviously see also clubs doing some of the more personal development, life skills stuff, which is active, get the boys out into the community, get them supporting various charities and initiatives that the boys are then feeling a little bit more close to, and it helps to develop their personalities, their passions, as they grow up into hopefully young professionals, whether that's within the football industry or any other professional industry.
You've now named many initiatives and many ways that club academy can go. But would you be able to describe, in your eyes, what does a perfect academy look like?
I get this question a lot, to be fair. I wish someone could define what a perfect academy would look like, but I don't think that would be a great situation because, again, as I said, no one size fits all, right? So I don't think we've come across the perfect academy. There's always room for growth. And I think that's the best thing about the system. There's always something that we can continue to develop. And that's because the people that work within the system are very keen for that development to take place. And we play a part in enabling people to reflect on their current practices and where they could improve. We've seen sort of like perfect or best practices at different environments, but I'd like to say there's a good combination out there in the field. And I quite like to be surprised by some of the smaller environments or the lesser resourced environments that people don't always take a second look into. But when you have people that are lesser resourced or in sort of like smaller environments, you tend to find that people chip in more and they try to be more creative, and that's where we get brilliant innovation. So some of my top clubs, without naming any, tend to be the smaller environments where the people on the ground really care so much that then that comes out in their provision. So I don't know if we can describe a perfect academy environment, but it's definitely one that would be individual, tailored to the needs of staff, but also players, but also the wider stakeholders, your parents, your carers, everyone that contributes to being able to bring someone out in their best way. So yeah, I probably think there's still a lot of room for growth, but in a very positive way, because we just keep moving the goalposts on what best practice looks like.
Cigdem, you do a lot. Your roles at work are just incredibly diverse. And now the question that really comes into my mind is, how do you actually manage to prioritize your time effectively and also ensure that each aspect of your role receives the attention it actually deserves?
I've always kept myself quite busy. I like it. And I think, again, I come back to the one of the first questions where I say I'm quite privileged to be working in a space that I really love, and I have done for several seasons now. So some of it doesn't feel like work. I have to caveat it with that. So it feels like you're in a good headspace when you're around some of that because you enjoy it and you're looking forward to it. Some of the stuff that I do in terms of like the additional roles, be it the club that myself and my brother started this year, or the Arsenal stuff on the side, a lot of that stuff is important to me as a person. And I always say, like, for example, Arsenal or my men's team, if I wasn't there to watch those games in person and be part of it and get involved in it, I probably would have sort of like that FOMO, like fear of missing out. I'd probably be watching it if I was at home, if it's an Arsenal game, for example. So why not get in the mix, develop myself? And I've built almost like a portfolio of various activities that I do in a very purposeful way. So where I feel that there's an area that I want to develop or I want to understand more, but I don't necessarily get that from the one core full-time role that I have, which in this case is with PJAC around the academy auditing, then I try to pick up various roles, projects, or experiences that help me engage in spaces that I want to be around or help me develop the skills that I want to develop. And I was a part of education and teaching for a while, and I'd always encourage young people to apply for stadium-based roles, particularly because they were sports students. But the wider experience that you get, the skills that you develop, I still say that some of my top experiences have come from the Arsenal work that I do. I've done some international fixtures at my favorite Turkish club, for example, flew out with Arsenal to Istanbul. I did the Baku Arsenal Chelsea final. We won't talk about the score. But all of those are massive international experiences for me that I might not get in other roles, even if I work sort of like 50 odd seasons. So it's important to be able to build that in and have a positive engagement with the work that you do. But obviously I have to be quite organized in terms of knowing what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, making sure I don't overcommit to something so that I'm not then not giving my best to any one environment, because I pride myself in trying to achieve high standards, trying to be engaging, trying to be present, trying to engage with people, network with people. So I wouldn't put myself in situations where I feel like I've gone or I've stretched myself too much that I can't make the most of that situation, because you get what you put into a situation, right? Or an environment or a relationship or an engagement. So I like to make sure that I can give my best so that I can get the best from the experiences that I'm around as well. But, you know, this day and age, we've got so much technology reminding us of stuff that I don't think it's easy to miss stuff now. You just have to make sure you're quite organized and approaching things positively so that you're in a good space.
Indeed. I remember couple of years ago, FIFA introduced a campaign called Living Football. I think you are a perfect example of somebody who actually is living football. And honestly, it's just amazing to hear that. I have prepared a real case study in a sense. Last year, FIFPro has released a report about workplace safety in men's football. One of those findings in the report is that the threat of violence has, of course, significant repercussions on player performance, with 88% of unions stating that it leads to poor performance by players, but also that it contributes to mental health issues amongst players. And also that many instances of this abuse go unreported, due to the fact that threats and aggression have kind of become normalized at football stadiums, and that players may silently accept aggression for fear of increasing the abuse of or prejudicing their employment opportunities, all of which is then contributing to creating a culture where this verbal and physical abuse is tolerated. Now, in light of these challenges highlighted in this report, how can football academies ensure the safety and well-being of the young players, both on and off the pitch, while still fostering a competitive and challenging environment for their growth?
So obviously, it's never nice to hear that sort of stat, but for me, just the way I approach things day to day, that's not a stat, that's people's lived experiences. That's something that they feel. And I don't think we can ever tell somebody how they do or don't feel in any given situation. So that's really sad to hear, particularly because, as you said, football is something that brings us all together and it's something that we love. It's really a shame to hear that people, particularly at the top professional level, are still having these experiences. I mean, I think a lot of work goes into trying to improve the environment, trying to make it as safe, as enjoyable and entertaining at the same time as possible for people. We all love a good football crowd. I literally go to games for sort of like fun. I take annual leave to attend games, to experience matches live in different stadiums, to experience different cultures and their approach to football. But as you said, that obviously has an impact on people that are the ones in the center of that. The academy space, in terms of developing players, puts in a lot of effort to develop strong young people rather than just players. I'm not sure how much of that is focused really around the match day experience or the pressure and the spaces that they can find them in. However, we all agree that parts of the transition process and that player pathway is around preparing people for men's football. So they're playing youth football, but how do we get them ready for men's football? And I think this is obviously a massive consideration in terms of how people take on that pressure, how they deal with it, how they perform under that pressure, because we've seen a lot of young stars that are meant to be the next big thing, and then they make one wrong move in terms of transfer move and find themselves in an environment that isn't a good fit for them, and they then don't perform at the potential that they've been sort of tagged with. So then you see a dip in a person's career and their performance. So I think it is important to make sure that we understand the experience of players. I think the wider football industry, including fans and people that put the additional pressures on in terms of that entertainment value, probably need to take into consideration how it feels to be on the receiving end of a lot of that match day experience. That, you know, that can be quite a lot. We watch it from a distance, and sometimes we think, oh wow, that, you know, that is, whoa, imagine playing in that environment. I couldn't imagine it. We probably say it, but I couldn't imagine it. But there are provisions in place to try and support younger players when they're in those environments, making sure that there's safeguarding staff, there's chaperones, there's a little bit of prep leading up to these environments, particularly where a young player sort of like rises to stardom and then they find themselves in front of the media. I know that clubs and the wider stakeholders, the leagues, the federations, try to put in place specific programming to help young people deal with these. But again, it's one of those things that's constantly moving. We've seen a massive rise in the types of incidences that you were talking about here in the UK, even like pyrotechnics and things like that. I've worked in football for how many seasons, I've said, and this is the first season that I've seen like so much more of that. So it's obviously another area that we need to continue to develop the considerations around.
So in order to tackle this problem, everyone should sort of, everyone who's involved in football in any way, so from fans to all the way to academies, should contribute to solving this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's one that we can move the attribution to one group or another. I think the match day experience is one, but where you've mentioned sort of like abuse, whether that's verbal, etc., that's quite a big area that needs almost like a cultural shift for us to say it's not acceptable. And that sometimes isn't just aimed at players, by the way. Your match day experience as an individual can be very negative at times too. So I would like to see us move to a place where there is a cultural shift where we say it's okay to call people out. It's okay to be able to highlight bad behavior. It's okay to be able to report people and believe that the reporting system is actually going to impact change and stop people from believing that they can behave a certain way the minute they get in a stadium, because you'll see some respectable people in the outside world come into a stadium and completely change their behavior and their language. So that's a massive cultural shift that's needed there. And as you know, any sort of human behavior change takes a lot of time and a lot of education.
Indeed. Well, let's all gather and contribute to making football stadium a safer place to be, not only for the players, but for fans and everyone involved. Çiğdem, looking ahead, and what do you envision as the future of academy development and player welfare / player development? I would say you can approach it from both ways, in the Premier League and also in the outside world for you.
So the next big thing, or the next developments in this space, I think mental health and well-being is obviously an area that will always be very important, particularly when we look at the number of people entering the system or hoping to enter the system, and some that don't enter the system. What's the impact there? And then the people that are in the system, and we know that success rate or that continuity falls as you get to the higher age groups, where the stake is a little bit higher, where there's for us in the UK a very important transition ages into scholarship, and we see the dropout from that. So not only do we need to develop and protect the well-being and mental strength of people within that system, and the people supporting them, the staff and their parents, carers, etc., but also the people that we're losing along the way. So the people that are falling out of the system, the people that are rerouting their pathway to try and, at all levels, reframe what success is, reframe what their experience with the system and their engagement with the system is, to say, even if I was in the system for 2-3 years, I've actually had a positive experience that's developed me. And therefore that's helped me with my mental strength and my ability to develop into a strong, resilient character through life. So my hope is that we develop the system in a way that we're having positive outcomes, whether someone goes all the way through the system and plays professional football at the end of it, senior professional football at the end of it, or if someone even wants to get into the system and doesn't quite get into the system, or doesn't maintain their status in the system for a long time. I'd like us to see a little bit more of a developed pathway plan for players. Again, whether that means they remain in the system for a long career, or they reroute after they leave the system. One of the things that I like to do myself, and that I'd love for sort of like the global system to do in this space, is to reach out and learn from other communities, other industries, but other countries and how they work the youth development systems. Is there anything we can learn from each other? How can we support each other? I get that there's that competitive aspect of what the youth development system does. But at the end of the day, if the core is the development of young people, and sometimes we take time away from young people being in their normal social circles or their schools, how is it that we're making sure that the system itself is topping that experience up and people aren't at a disadvantage because they were part of the system?
We have now reached the end of our episode, but before we say our final goodbyes, Çiğdem, there is one question that we ask to everyone at the end of this podcast. It is a question aimed at the next generation of sports industry leaders. If there is one advice you could give to anyone who's now trying to step their foot into the sports industry, what advice would you give them?
I used the word purposeful earlier. Be purposeful in the actions you take, the engagements you have. Be measured in your approach in terms of that proactivity. So yes, you want to be involved in stuff. Make sure you have an outcome from that, or at least an expected outcome, and then plan for those outcomes. It's okay sometimes not to be involved in certain circles or certain activities because it might not contribute to your overall aims, or your development. But on the flip side to that, be proactive to say, my circumstance right now or my job role right now doesn't give me access to X, Y, Z, or doesn't help me develop X skills that I need for my next steps. In that case, be quite proactive about what else can I do? And that's where the sacrifice comes in, whether that's sacrifice of time, social activities, developing in sort of like the social family aspect that maybe some other people focus on. If you need to take the time to be able to focus in your career, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I get a lot of commentary about sort of like myself and being quite engaged in football and work and career versus sort of like friendships, and family ties and relationships, etc., forward thinking. But I always say, look, it's personal choices. We shouldn't feel pressured to behave a certain way. But for me, it's definitely that purposefulness built into being proactive, so that you're not exhausting yourself being proactive without a set outcome or a set goal.
Be purposeful. That's a lovely piece of final advice. Thank you so much, Çiğdem, for it, and thank you for joining me at the 12th Man Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening. Make sure to give us a follow on our social media channels, also on your preferred podcasting platform. And to be able to see what's happening behind the audio, make sure to also follow us or subscribe on YouTube. That's it. That's a wrap up. Until next time, keep kicking.